Well, hello and welcome to week 15 of history. We have made it through half the year and everyone has survived so far, so good for you. Hope the holidays were happy for every one of you, and hope the new year is starting off good, and hopefully we can keep it going on a high note here. We're entering again, quite literally, the second half of this semester and the beginning of the third of four quarters. And this segment, the author titles it The Age of Reason. Now, if you go do a Google search on the Age of Reason, you will get different dates and whatnot. And a lot of it really, quite a few people, historians, place it around the 18th century. But the writer of our curriculum places it at between the years 1572 and 1632. And it's highly subjective, but it's basically the period after the Renaissance. We're starting to move out of the Renaissance, whereas the Renaissance thinkers, of course, look back to ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration artistically and otherwise. In the Age of Reason, the prevailing wisdom was to, with the discoveries of the New World and new resources, new lands, new opportunities, the idea was to kind of move away from Greek and Roman thought insofar as how bright could they be? They did not have access to these new worlds. Now we do, so we've got something that even the Greeks and the Romans didn't have. So they were wondering what else, because they missed all of this, what else did they miss? No disrespect to them, but this is a new era. So basically, a period where the prevailing thought was not looking back for inspiration, but looking forward for inspiration. Also looking increasingly away from the church in specific and religion in general. We've talked about the idea of humanism being one of the fuels of the Renaissance, that idea that humans have a certain divinity about them, and being human is not monstrous, it's not wrong, it's not inherently evil. There is much to be admired about humanity. Again, there are people in the church who try to combine these two, religious humanism or humanistic religion, if you want to call it that. The idea that while God is supreme, that we as God's creations pretty darn good too. And being a human is not to be human is not to be evil. Yes, we're all sinners, but we're not all evil. So you start to see a lot of that thinking in the Age of Reason, and again, getting a little bit further away from where the church is the single most dominant influence in your life. We will see lots more battles even this week between Protestants and Catholics, and by the time the Age of Reason is done, those battles will still be flaring, but you'll begin to see a Europe that is getting pretty darn tired of people dying for their religion. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't happen for a while, and it still is not 100% cured. The first segment of the lesson is going to be a little bit of science as we talk about, again, some of the advancements in thought. Remember our old buddy Copernicus, who had the heliocentric model of the solar system, where the Earth revolved around the sun and not vice versa. A couple of other astronomers whose paths intersected are our subject this week. Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. Book calls them stargazers of the Renaissance. And it's interesting insofar as one posed questions that he could not answer, and the other answered them, even though he was incapable of asking the questions. We'll explain. Tycho Brahe was born in Denmark. He saw a solar eclipse at a young age in the year 1560, and he was forever hooked on the heavens. He did not have, of course, any modern-day equipment, but he tirelessly charted stars and their movement, the lengths of days. Again, this just became an obsession of his. He actually was noted for a couple of other things. He was born into nobility, so he was going to get a good education, and he did. He lost the front tip of his nose in a sword fight, a duel with someone, and he crafted a fake nose out of silver and gold, and his metallic nose became a very distinguishing characteristic about him. He grew famous for being the first to accurately to see and describe what we now know to be a supernova, when a star explodes. And he wrote some literature on it that was very well regarded in academic circles. It really expanded the knowledge of the event. And by the year 1572, he was developing theories about Copernicus's theory of the sun being the center of the universe. He appealed to the King of Denmark for help, and the King of Denmark gave him a great gift, an amazing observatory on the island of Ven, just off the coast of modern-day Denmark. He came up with the theory that the stars that we see in the sky are still moving. And that, of course, just threw everything into its tizzy. First you're telling me the Earth revolves around the sun. Now you're telling me those stars in the sky that we see every night are moving? Well, he says the heavens are moving. They were not fixed in space. Odd as it may seem, he never fully accepted the theories of Copernicus, which seems a bit daft. I mean, obviously, as we know now, the sun is the center of the solar system. But Brahe's problem with Copernicus's theory was it didn't add up mathematically. He observed the other planets as best he could with the naked eye. I mean, you can see most of them if you're really looking for them on a clear, moonless night. And he said, while it may be true to a degree, it doesn't make sense because of the movement of the planets. It doesn't sync up in any way. And he thought it was a mathematical nightmare that no one would be able to solve. Well, he found a young man late in his career named Johannes Kepler, a German astronomer and mathematician, and he was one who similarly embraced the theories of Copernicus, but said something doesn't quite add up. And he didn't know what it was. Brahe knew what the problem was. There was something wrong with the orbits of the planets, something that wasn't quite right. So he asked the question. Kepler, whose genius was not in astronomy but rather in mathematics, he invited Kepler to Prague to serve as his assistant, did Brahe. They didn't always get along because, again, one's an astronomer, the other's a mathematician, but they were both very curious. Kepler tried to decipher Brahe's notes and formulated some odd ideas. Long story short, Kepler concluded, and this was central to everything, that the planets revolve around the sun not in circular orbits, but in elliptical orbits. He called them ellipses. This became known as Kepler's first law of planetary motion. And the mathematical discrepancies that Brahe discovered, Kepler was able to explain with ellipses. His second law of planetary motion was that as the planets are closer to the sun, the speed with which they move around the sun increases because of gravitational force. So it's almost like again, if you can imagine an ellipse at the I think it's called the apogee, where it's the closest point to the sun, the planet moves a little bit faster than it does, and the perigee, the furthest it is away from the sun, it moves at its slowest. So he took that and used the math to accurately explain why the planets move the way they did. The planet revolves, again, it moves faster when it's closer to the sun, and the opposite is true as well. Suffice to say that Kepler's laws and his math prove that the solar system is a very mathematical device, and he was also, just kind of incidentally, the first to grasp that an image is projected upside down on the retina of the eye. You've seen that before, where our eyes technically take what we see and flip it over 180 before our brains put it in the right place. He was the first to realize that. He developed a whole new string of calculus for which he should be condemned. I hated calculus, but Kepler was probably the foremost mathematician of his time. And the interesting thing here is you had to combine the worlds of astronomy and mathematics in order to get these answers. Astronomy alone, math alone, couldn't explain it. Next segment's going to be on Sir Francis Drake. Was he a splendid navigator and avant-garde sailor, or was he a pirate? It depends upon where you're sitting. To the English, he was a hero. He was sort of a swashbuckling adventurer who was a pain in the butt of the Spaniards. England and Spain were very much at each other's throats politically at this time. And because he ransacked Spanish ships and robbed them and brought the money back to England, he was seen as sort of a modern-day seafaring Robin Hood, so to speak. He even went to Spanish settlements in Lima, Peru, and robbed them of their gold and silver, ambushed the entire town of Lima one time, and made off with a lot of the silver that they were mining. Of course, you could say, well, the Spanish conquistadors were there stealing it from the natives, and he just stole it from the thieves. So, again, whether or not you saw Sir Francis Drake as a swashbuckling hero or as a pirate depended upon whether you were English or Spanish. He did all this with a wink and a nod from Queen Elizabeth I. She was very fond of Sir Francis Drake, and he performed a lot of so-called off-the-book things for her, and she made sure that he knew that he had her support doing all this, although she never, of course, came out and said it. How terrible that pirate robbed you guys. Anyway, you get the idea. After Drake developed that reputation, and a very wide-ranging reputation, he set out to do what Ferdinand Magellan had mostly done. You'll recall he's credited with being the first to circumnavigate the globe, even though he did not make it all the way. His ships did. So Sir Francis Drake, in the year, 1577, set out to do this, again, to find trade routes and to harass the Spanish again on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Lots of mysteries surround this trip. Was it a business trip? Was it an exploratory trip? Was it a piracy trip? Was it a reconnaissance trip? No one knows, because this was done on the QT, much like everything else Sir Francis Drake did. The business of the voyage was very much off the books. Now, a few practical things were learned when he went through the Strait of Magellan at the southern part of South America. He was the first to discover that the Strait of Magellan wasn't really the southern tip of South America. To the south was another island, which was close to South America, but not part of the mainland, Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost, most Antarctic point of South America. He discovered that, hey, there's a whole new bit of land out here. He also, again, along the way, raided several Spanish settlements like Valparaiso in Chile, Lima in Peru, and stole more silver and gold from them. The mystery goes, as he went up the western coast of North America, at some point he put into port for about a month or so for repairs and whatnot. And just where he did is a great mystery, because it's not known. Now, because he put in port there and his men lived there for about a month, it would have been the first European settlement in the western part of the New World. And there are a whole lot of tourist directors in California and Oregon right now that would love to know that Sir Francis Drake ported in their area so they could promote that fact. He had they partook of the Lord's Supper there. It would have been the first communion done on the west coast of the New World. Anyway, his trip ended 3 years after it began, 1580, when he returned to Plymouth, England. The first thing he asked was, is Queen Elizabeth still alive? Because that was his bread and butter. She was. And she with great ceremony, boarded the ship herself once she learned that Sir Francis Drake had returned, knighted him, awarded him a green silk scarf with the Latin words meaning "the Almighty be your guide." And so in later years, he would surface again to help Elizabeth in her rivalry against Spain, including something we'll talk about in a week or so, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. But Sir Francis Drake, pirate, hero, depends upon where you're sitting. We're going to close out this week with news from the Netherlands. It's odd at this point. We've kind of hit on every other little region of Europe. I don't think we've said anything, though, about the Netherlands. Netherlands being the modern-day incantation of Nederlands, Neder meaning low country. This was very marshy ground in the northeastern part of Europe, near the North Sea. And it, because of the perpetually soggy conditions there, most of Netherlands is actually below sea level, believe it or not. And the Dutch, as they came to be called, the farmers in particular, used wooden shoes. Certainly not for comfort, but because water couldn't get through them. And so the wooden shoes became the thing to wear in the Netherlands. Whether or not you were a farmer, it became almost a fashion statement. And so the sabots, that they called them, and when they were when their workers were revolting against management, they put their sabots into the machines to gum up the machines, and they were called saboteurs. Just the more you know. The Low Countries, sometimes confused with Holland. Holland is actually a part of the Netherlands. If you were to, if someone said, oh, you live in the nation of California. Well, California is only part of the U.S. Holland's only a part of the Netherlands. This region of Europe had seen lots of influence from the Vikings, of course. So you're getting a lot of different influences into this area. Also known for windmills. The windmills were used to power pumps to get water out of some of the low country. So you see an inordinate amount of windmills. Windmills and wooden shoes is sort of what the Netherlands are known for colloquially. So our story here, in terms of what we will soon call Dutch independence, was indirectly begun with the old Holy Roman Empire. If you remember Charles V, he was the Holy Roman Emperor who was at odds with Martin Luther at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Well, he was from a family called the Habsburgs, a very wealthy European family that supplied the Holy Roman Empire with most of their emperors. In the 1500s, they inherited much of the modern-day Netherlands, and Charles V, who was a Habsburg, inherited the Netherlands when he became the Holy Roman Emperor. He was especially fond of Brussels, which is now in what's now Belgium. We'll get to that in just a second. And he actually moved the Holy Roman Empire's capital there. And so the Netherlands, the region, was fairly fond of Charles V. They came to think of him as one of them. Netherlands began becoming more and more Protestant, particularly around the north end. Charles, of course, he had lost a large part of Germany to Martin Luther and his Lutherans. He wasn't happy about that, so he brought in the Inquisition to try to quell the burgeoning Protestantism in the Netherlands. As many as 5,000 Protestants were found guilty and put to death in the Netherlands during the reign of Charles V. As bad as that sounds, it gets worse. In 1556, Charles retired, passed over this section of the empire to his son, who was currently King of Spain, Philip II. You remember him? He was the husband of Bloody Mary, and the one who tried to court Elizabeth of England a little bit later. Philip II never loved the Netherlands like his father did. He only looked at it as a place to command. And he wanted in on the growing trade business there, and of course he wanted to destroy the Protestant movement, Spain being very much a Catholic country at this point. Along this time, someone named William of Orange enters the picture. He was a Frenchman. The Prince of Orange became Prince of that province in southern France at the age of 11. He was raised in a strong Protestant family, but when he went to work at the court of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, he more or less insisted that he become Catholic, and he did, just in the course of carrying out his duties. In 1559, Philip II, Charles' son, appointed William to be the governor of 4 of the provinces in the Netherlands. William and Philip soon fell out of favor with each other. William very much distrusted Philip's, and he did not care for his persecution of the Protestants. Again, even though William was now Catholic, he was raised a Protestant, and so he felt obviously a kinship there. Bear in mind at this point, Spain is probably the #1 power in the world. They had gained a lot of riches from New World exploration, exploitation, what have you. By 1576, there was a revolt brewing in the Netherlands. It came to be called the Dutch Revolt. It was never like any one big battle, but it was just a series of conflicts between the people of the Netherlands and their ruler, Philip II, and from a larger degree, the nation of Spain. Ironic, because William had once been very close to Charles V. Now he's waging war, more or less, against Charles' son. He was the governor of the Netherlands, and he was leading those people in a sort of an open revolt against the king of the Holy Roman Empire. William of Orange once said this, quote, "The privileges," writes, "are no free grants of the sovereign to his subjects, but form contracts binding both prince and people. In other words, a king ought not to have the right to do anything he pleases to his people, but he should be in a contract with his people for their good." Sounds a little like the Magna Carta, doesn't it? No, the king is not immortal. As for leading the military end of the Dutch revolt against Spain, William didn't do a very good job. He was not a military guy. He upset the Dutch by asking France for help. He upset the Calvinists by failing to personally attend church regularly. He was not the most religious of guys. But he was extraordinarily patient. He was called William the Silent because he sort of kept his own sample. He didn't talk an awful lot. Very introspective person. He wept for those who suffered religious persecution, regardless of whether they were Protestant or Catholic. He wanted to see the Word of God preached and published as Protestants desired, but did not want to bring suffering to those of the Catholic faith, which put him in a very distinct minority at this point. The next chapter of this Dutch revolt involved a guy named the Duke of Alba. He was sent to the Netherlands by Philip to set up something that would be called the Council of Troubles. Their job was to investigate and persecute people who were not loyal to Philip of Spain and to the Roman Catholic Church. Well, of course, thousands were guilty of both. It's been recorded that under the Duke of Alba, 50 to 70 Dutchmen were executed every day. About 8,000 of them eventually. 30,000 people were stripped of their property. At least 100,000 fled to other countries because of this Council of Troubles. They called it the Council of Blood. As bad as it was, it gave fuel to the Dutch revolt. It gave people even more of a reason to fight. The Dutch weren't successful on land, but they were outstanding on the sea. They manipulated dikes to flood out the enemy. They took their fury out on Spanish trading ships. The loot that they stole from the Spanish helped pay for 80 years of conflict, basically. By 1573, the Duke of Alba left his post. His brutal methods did much more harm than good to Philip's cause, as the Catholics even began to despise the Council of Troubles, even though it was ostensibly a pro-Catholic, anti-Protestant effort. The final straw occurred in Antwerp in 1576. The Spanish soldiers, who were not being paid, took out their fury on the local Dutch. They savagely attacked and pillaged the village, and thousands of Dutch were massacred in Antwerp. Homes were looted for their money. The soldiers just basically broke all discipline and became a murderous mob. The northern provinces in the Netherlands, if you look at it on a map, where Holland is, were usually the more Protestant areas. The southern part, on the other side of mountains, a little bit higher country, were predominantly Catholic. But however, the horrible incident in Antwerp caused the Catholics of the South to rise up against the Spanish as well. They came together to sign what was called the Pacification of Ghent. Under William the Silent, all 17 provinces of the Netherlands were united, at least for a time. William was not able to keep them all together. Spain won back the southern provinces, and they left the north 2 years later. So 7 provinces eventually joined at the Union of Utrecht, vowing to remove Spain from the northern Netherlands and to give religious freedom to all. They renamed themselves the Republic of the United Netherlands. The southern provinces eventually pulled away altogether, and today they are known as the nation of Belgium. And to this day, the Netherlands is largely Protestant and Belgium is largely Catholic, although it's fair to point out that these two regions of Europe are not really overtly religious as some countries were. They're sort of, I don't want to say irreligious, but religion in mainland Europe today is not the force it was 500 years ago, certainly. Which brings us to 1581 and the Dutch Declaration of Independence. It was officially called the Act of Abjuration. I want you to listen to a passage of this and see if you hear anything familiar. The people were not created by God for the sake of the prince, but on the contrary, the prince was made for the good of the people. It was a bold step towards democracy, and if those words sound familiar, that means you've read the American Declaration of Independence. Very much a precursor. That whole idea that the people's purpose is not to serve the government's purpose is to serve the people. Philip of Spain still wasn't pleased with things. In 1581, he issued basically a hit for William the Silent, and after several attempts, someone did eventually assassinate him. He died at the age of 51. The tragedy, again, caused the Dutch to move up even more strongly against Spain. They had a very, very conspicuous martyr. Under William's sons, and with some help from England, the Netherlands eventually became a free nation, a proud free nation, for having fought such odds against such a powerful country. William the Prince of Orange. The color orange is still a national color of the Netherlands. If you see a Dutch athlete competing in the Olympics, they will be wearing orange. That is the way they choose to remember their George Washington, William the Silent, William of Orange. I won't be silent anymore. I'll see you on Monday.